Hello, stranger. Well, I've done it again. I've watched another newest TV show that is actually relevant in today's conversation. After almost a year's delay, I got around to watching House of the Dragon, and I thought it was pretty great. No, in fact, I thought it was fantastic. It reminded me of a certain other show that used to have interesting politics, deep and nuanced characters, and unique themes set in an epic fantasy backdrop. I just really hope House of the Dragon doesn't fall into that same fate. Anyway, watching House of the Dragon made me realise how many of my favourite shows are indeed spin-offs, and in turn it made my old noggin start thinking about what makes a good spin-off versus a bad one. I haven't really seen any other video essay covering this topic, so hey, I thought I might as well have a crack at it myself. Today then, we're going to be looking at what makes a good spin-off, how it's different from a sequel or expanded universe story, and then look at some key things that writers need to consider when creating them. All good? Excellent. I'm John from the Author's Anvil, and let's take a gander at this topic together. So what exactly is a spin-off, and how does it differ from a sequel show or a piece of expanded universe fiction? In the immortal words of Wikipedia, a spin-off is any narrative work derived from an already existing work that focuses on different aspects from the original work. I think on the whole this is a pretty good definition, but a little abstract for my taste, so I'm going to take a stab at simplifying it and providing some examples. In my eyes, a spin-off is simply a show or story that takes place in the same universe as another, but has a completely different narrative purpose or conflict behind it. Okay, that wasn't any less abstract, was it? What I mean is that a spin-off may have the same world, timeline, characters, and lore as the original work, but the actual story stands completely alone. You can and should be able to go into a spin-off with no prior knowledge of what came before and still completely understand and enjoy it. For example, I have never seen a single episode of Cheers, but one of my favourite shows of all time is its spin-off, Frasier, and while I may not get some of the references to its predecessor, all of the plotlines and character arcs are easy to follow and work without the need for Cheers to even exist. From what I gather, Cheers is a sitcom exploring life running a bar and working class culture on the east coast of America. There are many characters that explore this theme in different ways, and many plotlines that take place in and around the bar. Frasier, meanwhile, is a character study of the titular Frasier Crane, and is centred on his quest for love and finding a connection with his estranged family. Frasier may have guest appearances from Cheers' characters and may reference events that happen in that show, but the writers take care to quickly give you all the context you need to follow what's going on. And these guest appearances are so far and few between that often you kind of forget that Frasier even is a spin-off. Perhaps an even more stark example would be House of the Dragon, which takes place almost 2 centuries before Game of Thrones. Yes, the locations are familiar, and there are plot points that echo one another, but again, you really don't have to have any knowledge of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire in order to enjoy House of the Dragon. And let's face it, at this point you probably don't want any prior knowledge anyway. This idea of having a completely different narrative purpose is what I think sets apart the spin-off from the companion or expanded universe shows that we see in something like the MCU. Phase 4 of the MCU has many different TV shows that go alongside the films. However, while they might have their own self-contained stories, they are still somewhat contributing to the same overarching story in the background. In many cases as well, some of the shows really don't make much sense unless you have the context of past MCU content. I think you'd be very confused if you watched WandaVision on its own without ever having watched any of the other MCU movies or shows. You can absolutely make the argument that the different TV shows and films are therefore sequels and prequels of one another. But this does then beg the question, what's the difference between a sequel and a spin-off? There are many sequential film series, books, and shows that have very different plots from one another. Terminator 2 is a very different film than Terminator 1 in terms of plot, pacing, and formula, but you would never say that it was a spin-off. The distinction, I think, comes from what I said before about narrative purpose. While the Terminator films have different plots and sometimes different characters, the main conflict and theme is always the same: humanity's survival against killer AI robots. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy all feature a different theme and villain for Spider-Man to overcome, yet they are all consistent in that their narrative purpose is about Peter Parker becoming a better hero for New York City. The Indiana Jones trilogy are all standalone films, yet have the consistent narrative purpose of being fun action-adventure stories about an archaeologist trying to recover an artifact before a villainous party does. Meanwhile, every Golden Age Star Trek spin-off from the 90s have vastly different narrative purposes. Next Generation is about, well, the next generation of humanity's interstellar explorers going to new frontiers and leveraging new technology. Deep Space Nine is about a space station that sits right next to a Holocaust allegory and a wormhole full of maybe gods. Voyager is about a ship that is flung far away in the galaxy and has to single-handedly find its way back home through unfamiliar territory. To sum up this section, spin-offs take place in an existing fictional world, but must have a different narrative purpose or conflict. Sequels, prequels, and expanded universe shows nearly almost have a similar purpose that binds them all together into one narrative. All making sense? Excellent. Let's move on to some key elements on how to create a successful spin-off. I put a lot of emphasis on narrative purpose in our overview just now, and well, I know you're going to roll your eyes as I always bang on about this, but character is super important, especially if your spin-off is centered around a single character. If you have a world that's hopefully already filled with interesting characters, then it can be a joy to see one of them have their story expanded upon. But which character should you pick? I think spin-offs that focus on an existing character within a universe need to take two things into consideration. First of all, the character needs to be interesting, and second of all, they need to not be shrouded in mystery. Did I just say that they should not be shrouded in mystery? Why yes I did, but before I explain my reasoning behind that, let's look at that first point. The character you choose to be the focus of your spin-off show has to be interesting or have the potential to grow and change significantly over the course of the show. I don't think I need to go much deeper here. People are not going to give your spin-off show a chance if you choose a bland character who cannot be a vehicle to explore a new theme or concept. Let's take a look at a failed show, 2006's Joey, a spin-off of the hit, and highly overrated, sitcom Friends. The show was centered around Joey Tribbiani, one of the original 6 friends, who moves to LA after the events of Friends to broaden his acting career in Hollywood. The show lasted only 1.5 seasons due to its low ratings and even lower critical reception. Let's be honest here, out of all the bland and static characters from Friends, Joey was probably the one that was the most bland and most static. While Ross and Rachel had the whole on-off thing going on, and Monica and Chandler got married, and Phoebe had a baby and stuff like that, Joey in comparison really didn't do much on the show. He doesn't have much depth other than the struggle of being an actor in a harsh 90s world, and this is again another problem. His spin-off was exploring exactly the same theme with his character, except instead of struggling in New York, he was now struggling in LA. It was the same pizza, just served on a different plate. Let's contrast this failure with Frasier, who, as I mentioned before, used its character focus to explore a completely different theme. While Frasier still struggles with his romantic relationships as he did on Cheers, the real heart of the spin-off is him reconnecting with his family, namely his brother Niles and his father Martin. From what I've researched and heard, this concept was really never explored in Cheers, and Martin and Niles never even appeared in that show, so Frasier's spin-off feels very fresh. It also helps that Kelsey Grammer consistently gave us a nuanced performance that was equally hilarious and full of heart. Moving on to my next note on character. Yes, I believe that a spin-off focusing on a single character should choose one who is not shrouded in mystery. The reason for this is simple. It is very easy to ruin a mysterious character when you remove that mystique from them. Very often you see online how fans want a show about this cool, edgy character, or a show exploring this character's murky backstory, but honestly, do you really want that? I genuinely think that a large reason why mysterious characters become fan favourites is because it stimulates our imagination. We as the audience get to fill in the blanks about their backstory and don't have to suffer if and when the writers give us terrible answers. Think how cringe it would be if we got a whole spin-off show about Garrick from Deep Space Nine, or a young Giles from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or Loki from the MCU. Oh wait. You can still have someone edgy or shrouded by past mistakes be the focus of your spin-off, but they really don't need mystery to be interesting. This is where I can praise the Buffyverse for giving Angel his own spin-off. Angel is a brooding edgelord who moves away from Sunnydale and seeks redemption for his life as a sadistic vampire in the murky streets of LA. If you've seen the first season of Buffy, then you're already aware of who Angel is and what his past crimes were, but if you haven't, then Angel the show quickly fills you in within the first couple of episodes. Angel is not an interesting character because he has this deep hidden backstory that we have yet to unravel, it's actually the opposite. Because we know his backstory from the outset, we're presented with several interesting questions instead. Will Angel be able to achieve redemption? Will he be able to garner positive relationships despite his past trauma? Is there even a point to him achieving redemption? If a whole spin-off is based around a character's mystery, then you damn well need to make sure that the answers to those mysteries are satisfying and planned well in advance. It is far safer and usually far more successful to go with a character who has the audience's interest from their already established backstory, so that you can expand upon it and explore a different narrative purpose through them. This might seem like an odd topic, but I think what many great spin-offs do is add a sense of distance from the original work. And yes, I mostly mean about physical distance. It sounds obvious, but a new location set within your world is absolutely essential, and the further and more distant it is, the better. Again, we shouldn't need to go too deep here. If you make something too similar to the original work, then it quickly becomes tiring and boring to watch. CSI's first two spin-offs did well to pick American cities far and different to Las Vegas, however, I do think that in terms of actual set pieces, they are still way too similar. We still had an office set, a lab set, and an interrogation set, all of which made the two spin-offs look like reskins of the original. I know we had different characters and some different story arcs, but CSI Miami and New York really didn't help to distinguish themselves enough in the distance regard. A better example of a spin-off giving distance to a previous work would be Star Trek Deep Space Nine, that distinguishes itself from the original series and Next Generation by being set on an alien space station at the edge of the Federation. The heroes of that show protect a recently discovered wormhole that leads to a far-off edge of the galaxy. The spin-off thus gives us locations that are far away from many of the planets and aliens we're used to seeing in the previous two Star Trek shows. And also bonus points for unique looking sets. Deep Space Nine may have had the standard bridge, quarters and shuttle sets that we're used to seeing, but the alien tech that they're having to leverage really does add an interesting element to the viewing experience. I want to talk about now a different concept of distance in fiction: time. A spin-off can achieve a healthy distance from its original by setting itself in a different era. It can be a great opportunity to deepen the world's lore, give a fresh perspective on historical events, or just expand upon a specific theme in a more relevant context. This is where House of the Dragon excels. It's set almost 200 years before the original, so we're given completely new characters and new political scenarios. We may have already seen the Red Keep and King's Landing a load of times, but because this is set in a new era, things are very different than how they were in Game of Thrones. The Dragon Pit, and dragons in general, play a key role in Westerosi politics and Targaryen rule. While we've seen kings die and the realm fall apart because of it before, the themes of royal succession and who should rightfully rule a kingdom are more thoroughly explored than they ever were in Game of Thrones. And no, this absolute dumpster fire doesn't count. People and societies change when they age, and fiction should reflect this. So if your spin-off is set in the future, then make sure you have a good plan to aesthetically and technologically reflect this. And please do not commit the cardinal sin of setting your spin-off in the past but making its technology better than the present or future. Alex, please explain why everything in Star Trek Discovery looks like this, when it's supposed to be set 10 years before this. Both physical and temporal distance can be great ways to make your spin-off show feel fresh and interesting, while also echoing the original work. Just make sure that your new location actually feels new, at least aesthetically, and that any distances in time are thought out properly. As we've already highlighted in this video, a good spin-off should feel familiar but fresh, bold but grounded in proven methods. But how does one achieve this balance? The answer is by simply following established lore and canon as closely as you can. What do I mean by lore and canon? For those who don't know, canon and fiction is the idea of which stories or bodies of artistic work are officially accepted as part of the fictional world and narrative. What is and isn't canon is almost exclusively decided by the original creator of the world, or whoever owns the intellectual property. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and had those two works as the only official canon stories attached to Middle-earth when he passed away in 1973. He passed down the rights and intellectual property of Middle-earth to his son Christopher, who then in turn compiled and published other incomplete works to expand the canon, most notably The Silmarillion. While there are video games, books, and fan films with the Lord of the Rings name plastered on the front, only the works published and officiated by the Tolkien estate are in the official Middle-earth canon. If I wrote a random story based on the Lord of the Rings world and published it online, it would not be canon because I have no legal or official rights to the original work. It would be just mere fanfiction. Even if I got the license to sell and profit off of the story from the Tolkien estate, however, only they would decide whether my book was part of the official canon. Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor is an example of something that has been licensed by the Tolkien estate, but is not part of the true canon of Lord of the Rings. You might have also heard about studios and owners decanonizing stories. This notably happened when Disney bought Lucasfilm, and then Kathleen Kennedy declared that the decades worth of expanded universe stories set in the Star Wars universe, which George Lucas had previously endorsed, was now no longer part of the official Star Wars story. Despite George Lucas being alive and well as of the writing of this video, he now no longer has the right to declare what is and isn't canon, as he gave the intellectual rights to Disney, and we've all seen how that's turned out. But how does this idea of intellectual property rights and determination of official stories matter to spin-offs? Well, that's where lore comes in. Much more simply, lore in fiction is just the canonized, hence official, established rules, history, and characters that appear in a work. Lore is anything from Game of Thrones' deep family histories to what the limits of a transporter can do in Star Trek. I hope you're starting to realise now why canon and lore are therefore very important for a spin-off. When you make a TV show or film or book that is set in an already established fictional world, you've got to do your best to be consistent with the established rules and continuity of that original work. I'm going to use an extreme example to illustrate why this is important, then we can go a little bit deeper into a real example of when lore has been broken. Imagine, if you will, if in House of the Dragon, the writers wanted all the guards to wield machine guns and modern riot gear instead of swords and shields. This would break the internal consistency of the world and make the original work of Game of Thrones make absolutely no sense. This is supposed to be a medieval setting where advanced projectile weaponry hasn't been invented yet, and if it did get invented during the time of House of the Dragon, then why the hell does no one have guns in Game of Thrones? This breakage of lore would leave the audience completely baffled, and would bring into question the logical sense of the original show too. While that may be a ridiculous thought experiment, I'm sure now you can dial it down and think of a more realistic and lesser example of lore breaking in TV shows that does harm the consistency of a work. In Game of Thrones, for example, the bells of King's Landing are established as a call to arms in Season 2. But then in Season 8, we get the same characters telling us that if you hear the bells, it means surrender. Or again, need I remind you of how the original Star Trek series had standard warp drive that propelled ships at the mere speed of light, but then Star Trek Discovery came along as a supposed prequel and showed us that humanity was capable of developing engines that could instantly travel anywhere in the galaxy at any time through fungus! God, I wish I was making that up. I really hope I don't have to go too deep into explaining why breaking lore is unwise. A fictional world that is fleshed out and interesting and easily understood can be an absolute joy for an audience to immerse themselves in. When we understand the internal rules, history, and physics of a world, we understand when characters are in danger, we understand the stakes of a story, and we can feel satisfied when challenges are overcome. You can absolutely introduce new lore into your spin-off, but you must make sure that it doesn't contradict what came before. If it doesn't make logical sense, then I'm afraid you need to go back to the drawing board, otherwise you will not only alienate your audience, but you also look very foolish. And don't get me wrong, it can be super hard to remain consistent when it comes to expansive fantasy and sci-fi worlds, and mistakes are understandable and probably inevitable. But there is a huge difference between getting a character's birthday wrong and shoving in an insane power for your space wizards to use that is never brought up again. Do your research. Consume all the canonized works from top to bottom. If you can, get in touch with the original creator and ask questions. It's obvious to say, but putting the effort into understanding the original work will have huge payoffs with the fans and with your writing ability. Respect the lore, and your spin-off will at least be gladly accepted into the fictional world's canon, even if the rest of it is written badly. Spin-offs can often have a bad rep for just being soulless, money-grabbing, key-jangling products, but I hope this video has demonstrated that that does not need to be the case. A spin-off can be a great opportunity to expand lore and give the audience a new story set in a beloved world. So let's quickly sum up what we've covered. When creating a spin-off, writers need to keep in mind what the new narrative purpose of the story is and how an existing character or theme can embody it. How to properly distance the show from its original work, either through location, aesthetics, or time. And finally, how important it is to follow the established canon and lore of the fictional world in which you're adapting. There are, of course, 1,000 other elements that need to be considered when spinning off an original work. You need a great production design to balance that fresh but familiar look, great actors to bring new characters to life, and great showrunners to push the story and the production forward. But as always, I'm all about that writing, and I hope this has given you some food for thought about what makes a good and bad spin-off. I do wonder if some, if not a lot of what we've talked about today could be applied to expanded universe stories too. Perhaps if Marvel and Disney thought about creating a unique narrative purpose to their miniseries, with proper distance and a respect to past lore, then phases 4 and 5 wouldn't have gone completely down shit creek. And we know you can do it, Disney, because you did a stellar job with the original Daredevil TV show. But anyway, that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. For now, though, let's just pray that if one of our beloved franchises does get a new spin-off, that the writers and showrunners consider the above, so that it doesn't soil the entire universe it's based off of. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video has inspired you to check out the spin-offs I've mentioned in this video. Here's a list of the ones I'd recommend, but if you have any others that you think I should check out, then leave a comment below. Until then, I hope you can enjoy the already published videos on my little old channel. You'll find that some of the smaller points I made here are covered much more thoroughly in these other essays. Hope to see you next time, have a great day, and remember to keep writing.